Eve story by Chan Thomas, Chapter 2. The Great Floods. Noah, Adam, and Eve, Vishnu, Osiris, what do they have in common? They represent eras, ages apart, and yet somehow they all join hands in the next cataclysm and walk with us. There are others who walk with us too, men of science, long forgotten, those who first saw that these tumbles, these cataclysmic catastrophes, or revolutions of the Earth's shell have happened before, countless times. J. André de Luc in 1779 and Georges Cuvier in 1812 were the foremost. Delemu, the famous mineralogist, joined the consensus, as did Escher and Forel, the Swiss geologists, also J. André de Luc Jr. and von Bock. They all agreed that the cataclysms were caused by sudden revolutions of the wrong direction by the surface of the Earth. Cuvier, in his Theory of the Earth, first published in 1812, based his conclusions on his unparalleled correlative research in stratigraphy, comparative anatomy, and paleontology. As a matter of fact, Cuvier was the founder of the science of comparative anatomy, based on his pioneering self-taught work in that field. At the time, he wrote, "Every part of the earth, every hemisphere, every continent exhibits the same phenomenon. There has, therefore, been a succession of variations in the economy of organic nature. The various catastrophes which have disturbed these strata have given rise to numerous shiftings of this continental basin. It is of much importance to mark that these repeated eruptions and retreats of the sea have neither been slow nor gradual. On the contrary, most of the catastrophes which occasioned them have been sudden, and this is especially easy to be proved with regard to the last of these catastrophes. I agree, therefore, with M.M. de Luc and Delemu in thinking that if anything in geology be established, it is that the surface of our globe has undergone a great and sudden revolution, the date of which cannot be much earlier than 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Also, one preceding revolution at least had put the continents under water, perhaps 2 or 3 eruptions of the sea. These alternations now appear to me to form the problem in geology that it is of most importance to solve. In order to solve it satisfactorily, it would be necessary to discover the cause of these events. These ideas have haunted, I may almost say have tormented me during my researches among fossil bones, researches which embrace but a very small part of those phenomena of the age preceding the last general revolution of the globe, and which are yet intimately connected with all the others. Many attempts have been made to answer the charge made to the geological profession by Cuvier to explain these sudden revolutions in the wrong direction. Among others, Velikovsky tried it through his studies of myths and legends, Hapgood tried it, Hugh Brown attempted it, and in the process amassed a tremendous library of geological data. Every time the cataclysmic concept has arisen, the beast has been stoned, burned at the stake, beaten to a pulp, and buried with a vengeance. But the corpse won't stay dead. Each time it rises the lid off its coffin, and it says in sepulchral tones, "I will die. No, you will die before I." The last of the challengers is Professor Frank C. Hibben, who in his book, The Lost Americans, said, "This was no ordinary extinction of a vague geological period which fizzled to an uncertain end. This was catastrophic and all-inclusive. What caused the death of 40 million animals? The corpus delicti in this mystery may be found almost anywhere. Their bones lie bleached in the sands of Florida and in the gravels of New Jersey. They weather out of the dry terraces of Texas and protrude from the sticky ooze of the tar pits off Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. The bodies of the victims are everywhere. We find literally thousands together, young and old, foal with dam, calf with cow. The muck pits of Alaska are filled with the evidence of universal death, a picture of quick extinction. Any arguments to the cause must apply to North America, Siberia, and Europe as well. Mammoth and bison were torn and twisted as though by a cosmic hand in a godly rage. In many places, the Alaskan muck blanket is packed with animal bones and debris. In trainload lots, mammoth, mastodon, bison, horses, wolves, bears, and lions, a faunal population in the middle of some cataclysmic catastrophe was suddenly frozen in a grim charade. Supernatural winds, volcanic burning, inundation, and burial in muck, preserved by deep freeze of both torn up animal and muck. Any good solution to a consuming mystery must answer all of the facts. Challenges Hibben. The challenge wouldn't leave me alone. Like a hunger, it gnawed at my subconscious. I could hear the deep tones of Coover's challenge, find the cause of these events, still reverberating through the sacred halls of science, ghostly, unanswered. I felt Hibben's challenge prodding, answer all of the facts. I decided that the cataclysmic concept, this catastrophic end which visits our planet time after time, needed verification and refutation once and for all. The first step was to gather all of the known, accepted data from as many sciences pertaining to our planet as possible. Stratigraphy, archaeology, radiology, anthropology, paleontology, and oceanography, plus cosmology and astronomy, and seismology and oceanography, and paleo languages such as prehistoric Mayan. Even evolution could not be ignored. Further, cross-correlation of the data between the sciences had to be honored. All of the foregoing gave the answer. Although there is enough data in most sciences to indicate that these cataclysms happen, there was not enough in each science to derive the process or prove the concept. But between science, cross-correlation showed indeed that the concept was true. Not only did it verify that the events have happened, but disclosed when the last 5 cataclysms were, and what positions the shell of the Earth has been in for at least 35,000 or more years. This was a first-time effort for certain. So, after years of research, beginning in 1949, Coover's challenge had an answer. Yes, indeed, cataclysms do happen, but I had not yet found the answer to this challenge. Find the cause of these events. It would take me 20 more years to find the cause, the trigger of cataclysms, what makes them start, and further, exactly what is it that happens after it starts? What is the process of cataclysm? Finally, what is the timetable of cataclysms? It was obvious already from the data that it was not linear. Was it a mathematical function that could derive from the that we could derive from the data, or is it random and frustrating in its unpredictability? The more learned, the more to be discovered and learned. Meanwhile, what a chase, and what a dramatic story of Earth's history we uncovered. Civilizations of more than 20,000 years ago, more advanced than our wildest imagination, prehistoric legends from Greece, Egypt, India, and South America, which became history instead of legend, lost continents in the Atlantic and Pacific, which became dated realities with logical reasons for their sudden disappearance. Yes, Vishnu came alive, a man who lived through a cataclysm many thousands of years ago, actually 10 cataclysms ago. Now he is known as the Hindu god of 10 resurrections from the waters. Osiris was rediscovered. He was the Jesus of his time, a man of Egypt some 15,000 years ago. Noah smiled at us from the pages of the Epic of Gilgamesh. He actually was a Sumerian named Tim, who lived just around 7,000 years ago. The ark he built is more than legend. The process of cataclysm is known now. Look at the cross-section of the earth inside the front cover. You'll see two molten layers. The yellow one's the important one, and the thin molten layer starting 60 miles down, extending 60 miles deeper to the 120 miles below the surface of the earth. The thick, deep molten layer starting 18,000 miles down at the bottom of the mantle and extending 1,300 miles deeper is the outer core. Seismology has proven these two yellow layers to be molten, and they were white hot over 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And they are white hot over 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The outer 60-mile thick layer is the one which supplies the volcanoes with the molten lava they spew forth. Inside the Earth, the electrical and magnetic structure of the interior makes these layers act as if they were near solid or plastic. As long as the interior magnetic and electrical structure of the Earth maintains its orderliness, the old Earth keeps on rotating on its axis in a normal manner. If anyone doubts that America's ice cap is growing, it has been proved that it is growing at the rate of a Lake Ontario per year. So is Greenland growing. Since they are not centered on the Earth's axis of rotation, they develop centrifugal forces coupling with each other in a direction perpendicular to the Earth's axis. It's like swinging a bucket of water around yourself on a rope. The water stays in the bucket. If you do not have the restraining rope, the bucket and water would fly away. In the case of the ice caps, the restraining rope is gravity, which keeps the two ice caps landlocked. Since these ice caps therefore cannot fly away, they resolve their problem by trying to pull the entire shell of the Earth above the 60-mile thick molten layer around the interior of the Earth. As long as the electrical and magnetic structure is maintained inside the Earth, the ice caps cannot pull the shell around to let go to the equator. And we maintain our orderly daily, monthly, yearly rotation. Right now, we don't know why every few thousand years on a varying timetable the magnetic and electrical orderliness in the shallow molten layer is disorganized. Further, it is not known by what means it is disrupted. It has to be a way which lowers those energies to the extent that the shallow molten layer is allowed to act as a free liquid, letting the molten layer act as a molten liquid, which then serves as a lubricant for the ice caps to pull the shell around the Earth's interior so as to have the ice caps shift about 90 degrees into the torrid zone. In 1/4 to 1/2 a day, the geographic poles move to the torrid zone, and all hell lets loose. The atmosphere and the Earth's oceans and lakes don't shift with the shell. They just keep on rotating west to east, and at the equator, that speed is about 1,037 miles per hour. It has to be normally to make one revolution per day. So while the shell shifts with the poles going to the equator, the winds and oceans continue eastward, blowing and flooding across the Earth at supersonic speeds, inundating continents with water miles deep, destroying everything with which man ever dealt, including himself. That is a summary of the process. Now, what about the trigger? This turned out to be the most elusive piece of the whole puzzle. We couldn't rely on supernatural assumption, like sometime happenings in the heavens of a vague character, which actually violated the laws of nature. No, it had to be something natural, a part of nature's ordinary structure, which disrupts the Earth's inner electrical and magnetic structure whenever a cataclysm happens. It also has to be a kind of happening which decreases the inner electrical and magnetic forces to the extent that they cannot support keeping the shallow molten layer acting as if it were plastic or near solid. We once thought that the severe sunspots could be the cause, because they do disrupt the Earth's inner electrical and magnetic structure, but we were wrong. The time wasted on that assumption was the price for dealing in assumptions rather than facts. It was a bad detour to take. What was necessary was to be patient, to take more time, to assemble more facts, and to use our most valuable tool, analytical reasoning. The solution, whatever it might be, would come. The derivation of the process gave us a greater understanding of prehistoric events. For instance, you can see that ice ages are not a matter of advancing and retreating ice. It's simply that different areas of the Earth are in polar regions at different times. For different durations of time, changes between positions take place in a fraction of a day, and the accompanying supersonic deluges deposit the various huge stratas we find in the walls of the Grand Canyon, Painted Desert, Monument Valley, the mountains around Mexican Hat, Canyon de Chile, and Moku Dogwe. The story around the world gives silent testimony. The Barakoska mammoth, frozen in mud with buttercups in his mouth, the age of the gorges below Niagara Falls and St. Anthony's Falls, both about 7,000 years, the sudden end of the Laurentian Basin ice cap in Canada about 11,500 years ago, the uninterrupted evolution of the Galapagos over 11,000 years, the geological datings in the Murrumbidgee River Basin system in Australia, showing the end of an ice cap there about 11,500 years ago, the age of fossil bones taken from the Wilshire Boulevard tar pits around, over 11,000 years. The sudden end of all work in the prehistoric city of Tiwanaku, Bolivia, 11,500 years ago. Leonard Woolley's great work in the Holy Land, dating Noah's flood at about 6,000 years ago. The end of the Wisconsin ice cap about 29,000 years ago. The sudden 200-foot rise in the oceans all over the world about 7,000 years ago. The sudden rise of the St. Lawrence Riverbed 7,000 years ago. The changing levels of the shoreline of the Hudson Bay in Canada. The huge, gigantic blocks from the Alps sitting on the eastern slopes of the Jura Mountains at 4,000 feet above sea level. The great legendarian Fraser's uncovering of over 8,000 verified separate inundation survival legends in the Malay Peninsula region. The Pajark Marsh in Australia, which shows a quick extinction of many species, including humans, 11,500 years ago. The Piri Reis map showing the North Pole in Egypt. The Egyptian water clock showing agreement with the Piri Reis map. Granite on top of the mountains around Death Valley in California. The great stratifications of the Grand Canyon, Painted Desert, Monument Valley, the Badlands, each layer homogeneous, showing it to be deposited there suddenly by fantastic amounts of super swift water. The present growth of the Arctic ice cap, approximately 293 cubic miles of ice per year. The legends from primitive man in Tierra del Fuego, at the southern tip of South America, of the day the sun set in the wrong direction. The legends from primitive man in Peru, of the day the sun stood still. The legends of Malayan and Samaritan tribal aboriginals of the long night. The Verve, Earth strata, counts in Renshaw, Minnesota, and Hackensack, New Jersey, which confirm each other. The prevalence of jade in the Orient, which is material heaved up from the mantle near equatorial pivot points during a cataclysm. The fantastic evidence of burgeoning tropical plants in Arctic Siberia, Alaska, and Antarctica, frozen and preserved for thousands of years in a fraction of a day during a cataclysm. The similarity of languages the world over, from Polynesian to Greek to Egyptian to Mayan to Eskimo to Yukut to Oriental and more. The footprints of dinosaurs imprinted in beds of exposed river mud, frozen before the prints could deteriorate, remaining frozen for thousands of years to allow the mud prints to ossify for us to see as dinosaur footprints in rock beds today. The correlation of ice ages, stone ages, and quick extinctions of all species the world over. The survival of primitive life at the equatorial pivot points, the last two being the Malay Peninsula and the Galapagos, both now rife with lizards. The existence of a coral reef on the floor of the Arctic Ocean, and more and more and more and more give us a prehistoric picture of the positions of the Earth's shell during the past 35,000 or more years. The overwhelming evidence, when put into order, gives a dramatic picture of what areas have been at the North Pole, when they moved to the pole, when they moved away from the pole, and how long they were there. The chart is on the next page. Notice that the end of an era is the same as the start of the next era. Although the chart is in terms of years ago and years duration, do remember that the change from one era to the next occurs in a fraction of a day, short enough to be called abrupt. Yes, Noah, Adam and Eve, Osiris, Teora, Zeus, and Vishnu have much deeper meaning now, and as they join hands and walk with us, we hear Adam and Eve saying, "Listen, for now, we can truly share our story with you."